I installed a voice over IP client on my workstation and dialed the hospital. The packets went nowhere. I wasn't surprised. The company firewall was strict. One of the ironies of working for the world's most advanced research lab is that our internet connection was like dial-up. The filter had to sniff everything. I played with the port settings, but it didn't help. I would have to jury-rig something that made audio look like Wikipedia pages. I thought about this. It seemed possible. Another solution would have been to leave Better Future and find a payphone, but to be honest, I thought about that only later. The legs came along in leaps and bounds. No actual leaps and bounds. The lab ceilings weren't high. We had to save that for outdoor testing. But I could tap a hoof, I could step over a knee-high obstacle without crushing it. In fact, I could step over a knee-high obstacle without noticing it because the legs sensed terrain. I just willed them to take me somewhere, and while they took care of that, I could think about other things. I felt like the way travel was supposed to work. A 24-hour period passed in which nothing went wrong. I wore the legs outside the lab, up and down the corridor. We called them contours on account of their sweeping lines. They were a good-looking set of legs. I wanted to show Lola, but I still hadn't been able to reach her. It had only been 5 weeks. One day I was fitting myself into the contours, and the legs began to retract. This was not supposed to happen. They should have been powered down. One of the assistants cried out in alarm. I looked at the pistons and the narrowing gap between them and reached out as if I could stop them. There was a wrenching. A brilliant flash of pain. Someone screamed. Hands pulled at me. I saw Jason's face contorted in grief. He said, "I'm sorry," over and over. I looked at my hand. It was sandwiched between the contour's knee and the retracted socket. There was a lot of blood. I felt dizzy. "I'm so sorry," Jason said again. He was technically in charge of the contours until I stood up, but we hadn't been strict about that for a while because everything had been going so well. "I'm so sorry. It's okay." I was about to faint, but I wanted to tell him this. "It's no problem." "Charlie," said Lola. She sounded robotic because my computer was untangling her audio from IP packets that, to the corporate sniffer, looked like a long joke email. But there was an unmistakable delight in her voice. I felt relief. It had been a long time since who knew what had changed. "I've been calling and calling." "You have?" "Yes. They always tell me you're busy and I have to leave a message, and I got your home phone number. But your answering machine filled up. I haven't been home." "Since when?" I had to think about this. "March?" "Charlie," her voice dropped, "I think you should get out of there." "Why?" I went to scratch my cheek and missed. I looked at my hand. I wasn't wearing my index finger, that was why. "I just think it would be a good idea." "Okay. Meet me," she said. "I'm going to give you an address." I reached for a pen with a hand that had fingers. A few years before, a guy in jail stabbed 3 people with a broken Schlenk flask. They had to use tear gas to get him out. He kicked and screamed that no one took his lab report seriously. One of the stabbed people died. For days afterwards, he congregated in corridors and asked each other, "You just can't understand it, can you?" They huddled in unusual social configurations. Engineers and marketers and managers and people from accounts, everyone wanted to make sure that everyone else agreed. "You can't understand it, can you?" Like they need to hear that no. At first I shook my head along with everyone else. I didn't want to seem disrespectful. But finally it got to me, and I said, well, obviously he was frustrated. This was to Elaine, my lab's assistant with the bad skin who quit because of nightmares. Elaine looked at me like she was trying to find something. "Yes, but to get so frustrated you would do something like that." I said that's what people did when they got frustrated. They displayed violent behavior. Elaine said, "But you would never do something like that." And I said probably not, but in the same environment with the same stimulus, it was fair to assume that I'd have a similar response. I wasn't a different species. It's not anybody's fault for feeling violent when their brain is flooded with vast vasopressin. That's just what happens. You drop a glass, it falls towards the earth. Maybe that's not the outcome you want, but don't blame the glass. Don't pass moral judgment because cause produced effect. We are biological machines. We have chemically driven urges. You inject a nun with a particular chemical cocktail and she's going to start swinging punches. That's a fact. This all seems simple and self-evident to me, but maybe I didn't express it well because that afternoon I got a call from Human Resources. They said counseling was available for anyone unsettled by the incident, but I liked to make use of it, and I said no. They said maybe I should anyway, and so I talked to a bald man in his office for 3 hours. By the end, he seemed to understand my point, or at least accept that I wasn't going to shoot up the office. He said part of our responsibility as civilized beings was to control our baser instincts, which I agreed with, but it made me think what a bizarre situation that was, a world of polite, smiling men and women, when serotonin drip away from savagery, pretending that they weren't. It seemed to me that the situation could be improved. I went to Lab 4 and climbed into the condors. I felt a few gammas were about, and they looked at me curiously through their Z-specs. "Are we testing?" asked one. I shook my head. I powered on and extended the contours to walking height. I took a step and another and walked out of the lab. By the time I exited the elevator, 4 security guards were waiting. One of them was Carl, the human mounted. "Good afternoon, sir. Are we going somewhere?" My legs were already detouring around him, and it was a moment before I could persuade them to stop. They were a little feisty. I came to a juddering halt. There was no one else around. I noticed the place had emptied. "Yes, out. Where would you like to go? We'll take you." "Just out," I said. "Part of testing. I'm sorry, Dr. Newman, but external testing must be authorized." The jaw tightened. It wasn't Carl's fault, but I was peeved about being cut off from Lola. I thought I should just walk out of here, because it wasn't like they could stop me. I didn't mean to express this as a mental instruction, the kind the contours would pick up, but like I said, they were feisty. And then they were moving so quickly that I had to grip the sides of the bucket seat. "Whoa," I said. Carl lunged at me like a linebacker. The contours snapped, so I stepped around him and thumped into the lobby. "Dr. Newman," Carl shouted. "Stop!" His voice bounded around the glass-ringed lobby. It sounded a little frightening, and possibly in response to us, the contours broke into a run. They pistoned toward the glass lobby doors. These did not open in time, which caused the collision detection software to stop me so suddenly that my forehead cracked against the smoked glass. That hurt. I would have to fix that. The gap between the doors grew wider and the contours took off. I was atop a jackhammer. With each stride, my neck stretched and tried to detach my head. When each hoof slammed down, my chin bounced into my chest hard enough to crack teeth. Through eyes blurred with tears, I saw an approaching road and thought, "Oh, please, now they will stop." But they didn't. They ran into traffic. I clawed for the emergency shutdown button and missed. That was possibly a good thing because, in retrospect, I didn't want to lose power in front of oncoming automobiles. A sedan whipped by so close its turbulence tore at my hair. A truck the size of a building honked. I heard a terrified shriek and realized it was me. There was a clicking deep within the contours, something I felt rather than heard. They stopped. I was in the path of a truck. I was going to die. I was going to learn why you don't conduct a live field test of new technology while strapped to the top of it. This truck would run me down when it stopped. Its driver would find a long bloody smear leading to a gleaming pair of perfect titanium legs. It would be the ultimate vindication of my work, a testament to the superiority of artificial parts and the need for comprehensive bug testing. The legs bent and sprang. The traffic and road grew small and far away. I let go of the seat to flail my arms. I was trying to grab air or fly. My upward velocity slowed. For the briefest moment I was moving leisurely forward, 60 feet above the ground, neither rising nor falling. It was kind of beautiful. The world grew larger and more dangerous. My brain suggested my terminal velocity at 40 miles per hour. That was how fast I would be going when I hit the sidewalk. Below, a woman and her young son gaped up at me. They were standing at the exact point I was destined to intersect the sidewalk. It was a terrible coincidence. Then I realized it wasn't. It was calculated. These people were cushioning physical objects that would help absorb the shock of impact. I had programmed the legs to avoid collisions on a horizontal plane, but anything lower than they were was deemed to be ground. It had seemed a reasonable assumption in the lab. The mother yanked her son's arm. He was no toddler. It had seen women wrestling with children of this age before, in supermarket aisles and parking lots. And usually the kids didn't budge, but apparently a man plummeting out of the sky triggered a major adrenaline boost, because this kid flew through the air like he was hollow. I impacted the sidewalk 10 inches away. Concrete split beneath my hooves. Dust burst into the air. My spine bit in a way that felt very, very wrong. I lost my breath and sucked in a lungful of powdered concrete. I felt the contours moving beneath me, preparing to run. I tried to tell them to wait a second because I had to apologize to the mother and make sure she and her son were okay, and so was I. But the legs didn't care. The world was defined by location, a destination, and the optimum path between the two. Nothing else was relevant. They were definitely going to kill me. They ran for 10 minutes. During this time, I clung to them, begging them to stop. Apparently one of the things you couldn't stimulate in the lab was the mortal terror interfered with the ability of the nerve interface to interpret mental instructions. Either that or they were willful. I tore past pedestrians. When I finally closed my eyes and gave in to them, they stopped. I looked around and saw a busy intersection. I was somewhere downtown. Seconds passed. My legs did not move. I breathed. My tie hung over my shoulder like a tongue. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My jacket was gray with concrete dust. I looked like a hobo, a mechanical hobo, and I laughed because that was a funny thing to be. And my legs had stopped like I was alive, and that was the most out of control freaking 10 minutes of my life. I considered heading back to Better Future. My chances of finding the cafe with Lola Shanks seemed slim. I should power down and wait for somebody to pull over and ask if I was okay, and then I could ask them to please call my company. Now that I thought about it, I should have built in a cell phone. That was a major oversight. Anyway, clearly the Contours had a major functional issues, could not be trusted to bear me anywhere. Then I realized I was outside a cafe, and inside it sipping coffee was Koala. I hesitated. The cafe had a green awning and iron furniture and people in nice clothes eating real food. I didn't want to make a scene, but Lola was there, and I thought maybe, and the lads took this as a green light. They strode across the road. I ducked beneath the doorway before it could hit me on the forehead. Heads turned. Pasta hung from forks. Lola's eyes found mine. Her hair was in a ponytail. She wore a long yellow dress that billowed in the chest but gripped her like death around the arms. She smiled, but nothing mattered except that I was here, and smiled too because I felt the same way. The Contours picked a path between tables. They were behaving. "Hi," I said. I couldn't stop smiling. Lola was right. I had been at the lab too long. I had forgotten what it was like to interact with people for the pleasure of it. "Hi." She looked down then back. We were the only people talking. We looked around and eyes shifted away. People cleared their throats and forced conversation. They were being polite. I was a little insulted because I was not disabled. Have a seat." The Contour settled. Pistons retracted. I still towered above the table, but not as much. Lola's mouth formed an O. "These look different. We've made a lot of progress. Where are the controls?" I tapped my head. "Nerve interface." Lola blinked. "Charlie, this is amazing." She stared at my hand. I meant to keep that out of sight. It was my robot hand. At some point I intended to cover it with molded plastic, but for the moment it was all metal skeleton and coiled electrical wire. I slid it under the table. "That isn't finished." Lola looked at me through eyelashes. When she spoke, her voice was low and throaty. "Charlie, what have you done?" "Well," I said, "you know, show me." I glanced around. The other patrons had returned to their business, or pretended to. I placed my hand on the table. Lola sat rigid. She didn't seem to be breathing. "Can I touch it?" "Yes." Her fingers crept closer. They explored my index finger, then ran down to the back of my hand. It was the first time I had really missed sensation feedback. "Oh, Charlie!" Sunlight bouncing off a building across the street played across her cheeks. A few stray hairs that had escaped her ponytail glowed orange. I felt myself lifting out of my body. That's how it felt, like I was leaving physical form behind, becoming something weightless and untouchable. Then a hard shard of light skipped across Lola's face. I turned. I'd heard the motor. Outside the cafe window, a white van jumped the curb and disgorged Better Future security guards. "Darn," I said. That was all I managed to say before they burst into the cafe and began to knock down the tables. Plates hit the floor. People yelled. In the midst of this, Carl spotted me. He raised his gun and yelled, "Lie down on the floor." He looked nervous. I didn't like Carl nervous. Not when he had a gun pointed at me. "Lie down!" I couldn't lie down. That was physically impossible. Didn't Carl know that? Lola grasped my biological hand. I saw fear in her eyes and felt sad because a second ago she had been happy and Carl had ruined it. "Lie down." I had been foolish to imagine Better Future wouldn't track me. I was wearing millions of dollars worth of equipment. The guards hovered at a radius of 20 feet. Bristling guns. It occurred to me that as far as they knew, my legs were armed. Conceivably, I could have built in some firepower. I wished I had. "Charlie, don't let them take you back," Lola whispered. "They came to the hospital. They destroyed your records." I heard a noise and turned my head. 2 guards were trying to sneak up on me. "Go, go," said Carl. He came toward me. "No!" Lola stepped forward and threw out her arms. It was as if she was trying to fly toward Carl and wrench his gun away, or call down the wrath of the gods or something. I don't know. All I know is Carl pivoted and shot Lola twice in the heart. It sounded like clang, clang. 6. "Well, this is really unfortunate," said Cassandra Cottery. "I feel terrible about this." I couldn't see her. My eyes wouldn't open properly. I didn't know where I was or had come from. "What we need now, I think," said Cassandra Cottery, "is to take a few deep breaths." My right eyelid peeled open. My left was still gummed up, but I could still see a blob. Where Cassandra Cottery's face must be, a frame of watery blonde hair. Beyond her was a ceiling. I recognized that ceiling. I was at work. "Would you like some water? You must be thirsty." I struggled to bring her into focus and said, Ag! I smelled something acrid and unforgiving. Cassandra Cottery disappeared, then returned holding a small plastic cup. Drink. I tried to sit up. Something swam in my head, sick and heavy. I think there's been miscommunication on both sides, said Cassandra Cottery. There are some real lessons to be learned. Lola, I said, it's understandable you're upset. I'd be upset in your place, but please bear in mind, it's a high-pressure situation. Our people forced into split-second decisions. Lola, this time it was a real word. My left eye fluttered open. In a minute I would be able to sit up. Shortly after that I would be able to get my hand around Cassandra Cottery's tiny neck and squeeze. It's the unknown, she said. It scares people, makes everyone worry about the worst-case scenarios. I remembered Lola reaching for me straining to catch her, but my legs hadn't moved. They were inert. They were anchors. I had seen slowly spreading shock on Lola's face, her mouth opening and closing, her fingers describing a slow arc through the air, terminating at the red flower blossoming beneath her yellow dress. The way she fell. That's really your fault, Charlie. I don't want to start pointing fingers, but the way you ran off, it made everyone wonder what you might do. Men in uniforms had pulled me from my legs. The nerve interface tore. A syringe had pierced my shoulder. I'm not sure you appreciate the pressure we're under. Management, the daily stresses, the what-ifs. I coordinated my arms and levered myself up. I was in a small windowless room. The walls were pale nostalgic blue, and on one wall was a first-aid cabinet. It was a medical room. She's in surgery, said Cassandra Cottery. You can watch if you like. I opened my mouth. Dizziness swarmed. I wanted to say surgery and thank you and save her and or else. I'd like your input on something when you feel up to it, she said. I'd like to know why your girlfriend has a metal heart. She left. It was just me, a bed, and a vinyl floor with some disturbing stains. Compared to the rest of the company, this room was the third world. I guess it said something about our priorities. We were not healers. The door was locked. At least I assumed so. I couldn't bring myself to drag myself off the bed and across the floor to check. I was missing my legs. I had operated without them before, but now I knew I would never leave them again. Sitting there, half a man, waiting to find out if Lola was alive or dead, I vowed I would never let anyone take pieces of me again. Eventually the door opened, and there was Carl. At first neither of us spoke. The last times we'd interacted, once I fled him on artificial legs, and once he shot Lola in the heart. It was an unusual social situation. She, going to be all right? Said Carl, I think. In the hallway outside, I saw a wheelchair. Carl came toward me, his arms out. I tried to push him away because I wasn't ready for him to touch me. It would be a long time before that would be okay. But he had arms like propane tanks, and I was groggy and missing a hand. He lifted me off the bed. Against Carl's rock-hard pectorals, I began to blubber. It was a post-traumatic reaction. I had been through a lot. Everything will be all right, said Carl. I sobbed. Carl was probably a decent man and a tough job. It was non-lethal ammunition. I wouldn't have fired otherwise. I stopped. I was familiar enough with our company's munitions line to know our definition of non-lethal. When he wanted to refer to a weaponry that left the target not merely alive but likely to regain full quality of life, he said, non-crippling. I punched Carl in the shoulder. It didn't seem to affect him. I tried again and he put me in the wheelchair. That book sucked, I said. That stupid time travel book. Carl didn't say anything, and after that, neither did I. Cassandra Cottery was waiting in a small, dark observation room above an operating theater, a tiny, suited silhouette. As Carl wheeled me in, she glanced at me, then returned her attention to the green-cloaked figures revolving around an operating table below. Carl closed the door. Before he could get his hands on my wheelchair, I found the grips and pushed myself to the glass. Lola was on the table. I could see one of her arms poking from beneath an ocean of green cloth. It was the only place on her on display, but it was enough. A surgeon stood with his back to me, his shoulders working. It felt very wrong. Lola lying there while a man she didn't know dug into her. I think Miss Shanks must have got herself into a trial, said Cassandra Cottery. The heart is syncardia, but very unusual. I could see it, the top at least. It sat in a steel bowl on a tray to a surgeon's right, a red-stained chunk of plastic and metal. It looked strange, but then it had been deformed by 2 close-range impacts from Carl's not quite lethal ammunition, a great deal of steel. Please ask her about that when she wakes up. I wasn't talking to Cassandra Cottery. I decided this in the wheelchair while Carl pushed me through the corridors that smelled of fresh paint. I wasn't talking to anyone until Lola was okay. Fortunately, we have a replacement, a little custom model of our own, and the facilities to install it. She looked at me. This room didn't exist until 2 weeks ago. We just finished construction. Do you believe in luck, Charlie? I kept my mouth shut. Me neither. Someone's looking out for your girl, I think. Someone upstairs. At first I thought she meant God, then I realized she meant management. We built this place for you, for your project. I'm not continuing the project. It broke my vow of silence, but I couldn't let her keep talking. Cassandra Cottery looked sympathetic. "All right, Charlie, whatever you want." She didn't believe me. We watched the surgery. After a while, the surgeon with his back to us moved aside. Lola's chest was a red, wet pit. "As long as we've got her open," Cassandra Cottery said. "I wonder if we could do anything else in there." I looked at her, furious but also embarrassed because I had been thinking the same thing. I was by Lola's side when she woke. It took me by surprise, even though I'd been waiting for it. Her eyelids fluttered, and 24 tiny muscles contracted, and suddenly her face looked different. It was a little disconcerting. I hadn't seen this before, this sudden infusion of consciousness. "Hi," I said. Lola reached for the tubes in her nose, and I guided her hand away. "You've had surgery. They had to replace your heart." Her eyes widened. Her fingers moved down to her chest. "Bah." "It's okay. Try to relax." "Bah." I leaned closer. "What?" "Bah." Her fingers closed around my shirt. "Bah. Don't exert yourself. You're not supposed to raise your blood pressure." She pulled. I went with it because I feared that if I resisted she'd pop a stitch. Her lips brushed my ear. "Back," she said. "Put it back." "Why aren't you getting her to talk about the heart?" said Cassandra Cottery. This was later, in the hallway. Lola had turned unresponsive. She stared at the wall and didn't answer questions. I had started thinking, I don't really know her that well. We had shared some intense experiences, but when I added up the time we'd spent each other's company, it was like 4 hours. When a person you've just met for completely changes personality, you start to wonder which one they are. Why did Lola seem to like me? I had never analyzed that. I had put in the same category as magic. She won't talk about anything. She's comatose. You're not trying. You're just saying her name over and over. Now I understood why one wall in Lola's recovery room was a big mirror. "You're watching?" "Charlie," said Cassandra Cottery, "I do not want to put any pressure on you, but what we've done here, this little in-house surgery, that's not entirely legal. Do you know how that feels to a manager?" She put a hand on her chest. "It feels like I'm kicking over the baptismal font." "What?" "A sustainable business works within the confines of the law." She gestured at Lola's door. "Goes against everything I stand for." "Then why did you do it?" Cassandra Cottery stared at me. "I thought you'd be glad we could provide such immediate quality medical care, but we're cleaning up the mess. That's what I'm doing, Charlie, cleaning up the mess. Are you on board or not?" I didn't answer. "Charlie," she said, "I'm trying to help you. I really am. Now get back in there and ask about the heart." I wheeled into Lola's room. No change. She was on her side, staring out of the window, or at least that's what I thought. When I got closer, I saw she was staring at the wall near the window. "Lola?" I reached out and touched her shoulder. "Lola, it's okay. Everything's okay." I stroked her hair for a while. Sometimes I repeated, "Everything's okay." I began to relax. I was soothing myself. Lola's hand closed over mine. Our eyes met. Suddenly, I didn't know why. I had wondered who she was. She was Lola, of course. "I was born with a congenital heart defect," she said. Her voice was low and distant. "Hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Only one side developed properly. I had surgery 3 times before I turned 2. It bankrupted my family, and I needed more. It was only a matter of time. I was a time bomb. We never had vacations or a new car or ate out. My parents never had another kid. They scraped everything together against the day I would faint and cost $300,000. So I decided to die. There was a photo album under the coffee table, and I used to read. And I'd look at the pages where my parents were young and happy and went places, and I wanted them to have that again. We lived way up north in a snow town named Chaban, and one day I walked out and took off my coat and hat and sat down next to a frozen stream. I was being romantic, I guess, but I meant it. I wanted to save my parents' lives. I sat there until I couldn't move, and then I fell asleep. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed, and my mom was crying. My chest hurt. I had damaged my heart. It couldn't beat by itself anymore. The hospital had installed an artificial one. It was a stopgap measure, the doctor said, because I was still growing. In a few years it would need to be replaced. So there we were, me with an expensive new heart, my parents wiped out. This time I took down my grandparents as well. I found that out later. The retirement plans that were shelved, their homes and heirlooms that were sold, all for my temporary heart, and maybe 5 years until I needed a new one. A few weeks later I was watching TV and my mom got a call. Her face went tight and she grabbed the wall, like somebody was pushing her over. It was the auto assembly plant, Dad's work. He had been on the factory floor. One of the robots had caught his hand, you know, the robots that make the cars. His hand was welded to a door. The foreman, when he visited, he kept saying he couldn't understand it. There were safeties. They were actually one of the things Dad was in charge of, so it was a little ironic. I mean, it seemed ironic at the time. They amputated Dad's hand at the wrist. When he came home, he had a check for $50,000. The payment schedule, there was a set amount you got for injuries on the job. Because of the union, you lost your left hand like Dad did, and you get $50,000. A thumb on the dominant hand, 20 grand. Big toes, 10 each. The little ones, 3 grand a pop. Diminished hearing is worth 10. Each foot is $40,000. Her eyes reflected the window behind me, mapping straight lines to curves. Guess how I know that? All these amounts. Dad was home for 6 weeks, Lola said. I made him breakfast. He walked me to school, and afterwards I ran to the gate to meet him, all bundled up against the cold. You couldn't tell he was missing a hand. He didn't have a prosthesis. He didn't see the point. He liked being home. It was the first time he hadn't had to work in years. We were both so sad when it was over. I wanted him to stay, but of course we needed the money, so we went back. 4 days later it happened again. Another accident. The same arm. He lost it up to the elbow. We visited the hospital, and Mom cried and said we were cursed, but Dad didn't look sad. He got 10 weeks recuperation. When it was over, I said, "Are you going back to work now?" And he said, "We'll see." It was 2 days. The dye stamp this time. Some toes. Mom couldn't bring herself to visit him. She was losing her mind, but I went, and I was worried because he looked really hurt. His foot was bandaged, and he was missing his arm. I climbed into bed and hugged him as hard as I could. I cried, and he said he was dying. He said no. I was wrong about that. He told me about the payments. He had a little booklet. He said, "See, Lola? The sum of the parts is greater than the whole." That's how it worked. The death payout was $100,000, but if you added up the individual body parts, they came out to a lot more. Even the hand, if you lost it all at once, was $50,000, but each finger was between 10 and 15. And the thumb was 20. You could maximize the numbers. He said he'd been silly with the hand, losing it all at once. Now he knew what he's doing. He was getting me a new heart. He kissed me and said it would make everything okay forever. The company sent a man to the house, asking questions like, was my father depressed? Had he talked about killing himself? They couldn't see that he was happy. I lied to them. I helped Dad plan his next accident. We had a notebook. We did sums and figured out which parts to lose. When he tucked me into bed, his eyes were full of joy, and I knew that I had the best dad in the world, because nobody else's father loved them this much. Mom found the notebook. I woke and she was screaming. I came downstairs and she was wild, hitting him. The next day she kept me home and gave me a talk about how Dad was sick in the head. She had him committed. I was so angry. She was trying to tell me he didn't really love me, that he was just crazy. We yelled. I wished her dead. We were never the same after that. Dad came home after a while. They tried to keep him there, but he outsmarted them, and his work couldn't find a reason to fire him, so he went back. They had a guy follow him around, a tall man with a mustache. Even when Dad came to pick me up from school, Dad said they went to the bathroom together. The way he described it was funny, like playing spies. We flipped through our notebook and added up the numbers and figured we were almost there. We knew how much we needed, just with bank interest, for a new heart. Just a little more, just a foot. It took him 3 weeks to find the moment when the man with the mustache wasn't there, but something happened. Mom came to school and took me to the parking lot and said Dad had died. He'd been crushed under an engine block. I didn't believe her. I ran home and dug out his notebook, and it was right there. It was only supposed to be the foot. The company gave us a check for $100,000, the death payout. He would have been so annoyed. $100,000 for the whole when the parts were worth so much more. We invested it, and it grew. When I turned 18, there was almost $600,000. I told the doctor I wanted something to last forever, something steel, because it was all I had left of Dad, and I wanted him to live in my heart for the rest of my life. Her face contorted. Her fingers dug into the cotton covering her chest, and they took it out. Once Lola had fallen asleep, I wheeled myself out into the corridor. Cassandra Cottery emerged from a door 10 feet away. "Well," she said, "that was some story." "Yeah. I am always curious about what motivates people to choose their careers." "It's never what you think." I said nothing. "She can have the heart. We haven't disposed of it, so if it has sentimental value, well, she can have it. I'll tell her." Silence fell. I said, "I want to continue the project." "Yes," said Cassandra Cottery. "I thought you might." The next day, Carl wheeled me through the corridors of the research to the labs. There was not much talking. While waiting for an elevator, he said, "I was very happy to hear Miss Shanks is recovering," and I didn't say anything. He took me to what used to be a lab in the adjoining project before we took it over. We stopped before the door. "I don't have my pass," I said. This was an accusation because I'd had it before he shot Lola. They had taken it while I was sedated, along with my hand and legs. Carl swiped his own ID. The lock's display blinked green. I was surprised because, as far as I knew, we did not grant lab access to security guards. Inside was a large room with many shelves. On slabs of gleaming steel lay half a dozen set of legs in various stages of completion. The contours were among them. On my right was a smorgasbord of fingers. Next to those, some hands. Until this moment, I had not really believed they would let me have my parts back. I had been bracing myself for Cassandra Cottery to slide into view and say there was a last-minute problem, but no. "Should I fetch your sweater?" I jumped a little because I'd forgotten Carl was there. What? You're shivering. It was true. Oh, no. I put my hands on the grips and pushed myself towards the contours. Carl did not stop me, did not close his hand on my wrist and say, choose something else. I ran my hand over the metal, checking connections, making sure everything was there. You really like those things, said Carl. They can press what? A ton? Something like that. It was 4 tons, which frankly was nothing compared to what they would do once I implemented some modifications I'd been thinking about. But I didn't say that because Carl was trying to engage me, and I didn't want to be engaged. You can never be strong enough, said Carl. That's for sure. He placed a card on the steel bench beside him. My ID. I'll leave you to it. That was the last time I ever saw him. All of him, I mean. I chose a selection of metal fingers and snapped them into a hand. It wasn't a full hand, it was more like a glove. In the accident, I had only crushed 3 fingers. It seemed worse at the time. The glove allowed the artificial fingers to slot easily into position, driving the nerve interface needles between my knuckles. This hurt about as much as you'd expect, but not for long. What I had discovered was you could get used to anything. I had the feeling of being connected to something large and cold and distant, and my synapses not popped presently. I looked at my metal fingers, and they moved. I wheeled myself back to the contours and pressed for them to retract. Once they were a comfortable height, I lifted the nerve interface mat out of the sockets. The great thing about the hand was the fingers did not tremble. They slid the needles into my flesh as precisely as lasers. When I had finished wiring myself, I hauled myself into the sockets. 3 weeks ago, I hadn't been able to do this without assistance. I had come a long way. I got comfortable and closed my eyes, and the pistons hissed. The contour's hooves thunked against the floor. I won't lie, it was one of the most sensual experiences of my life. As much as I missed those legs, I had underestimated how good it would feel to have them back. I took a step, thunk. The way they borne me through the city, screaming out of control, I had probably imagined most of that. These legs wouldn't betray me. They were reliable, I could tell. They were practically me. My eyes fell on the wheelchair. That thing looked like a joke. I walked to it, raised a hoof, positioned it on the seat. I pressed down. The chair's metal struts popped and squealed and splintered like firewood. I walked to the elevators. While I waited, hands behind my back, I hummed a little. The elevator doors opened on 2 assistants wearing C-specs. Good morning, Dr. Newman. They moved aside to make room. Hello, I couldn't remember their names. Are you going to come back to work? Yes, I said. No, those milky lenses were still a little creepy. Of course, I was half a machine, but still. Soon. Good. A tall one grinned. We have some things to show you. The doors opened. I stepped out. I was curious about those things, but I wanted to see Lola more. It was funny, because an hour ago, all I could think about was my parts, and Lola was almost certainly sleeping. There was nothing productive I could do there. Still, I made my way to her room and ducked under the doorway. Her eyelids briefly fluttered open. She smiled. It was a small smile, but very beautiful, and I thought about this afterward. This perfect moment, which could not be improved.